Thank you, everybody, for coming to this. It really does mean a lot. And this has just been an amazing experience. And then the other thing I want to say is, go Tigers. I also want to thank Kelly. She did a phenomenal job and made all of this just so easy. All I had to do was show up. And, same thing with Josh. I want to thank Mike Boyle from the Cedar County Historical Society. They were also instrumental in not only helping me to put this project together, but just providing me with the information and the knowledge and the experiences and everything that Frank Kenny Holbrook accomplished and what his family went through and endured, in the community of Tipton. And just thank you to everybody involved, and thank you to you guys for being here. Does anybody have any questions for me, just about the story or about the history or anything, just about what I'm doing, or all questions are welcome. Yes.
Is this going to get distributed? Because this is a story that needs to be told.
Well, currently I am in negotiations, actually with the Big Ten Network. I've been talking to the commissioner, and this will be just an episode in a documentary series that I'm creating, and it's about Black pioneers in American sports history whose stories have yet to be told. And actually, right now I'm working on the Hayden Fry, Jerry Levias story, for those of you that know about that. And those of you that don't, so when Hayden Fry coached at the University of Southern Methodist, or SMU, in the 60s, he gave a scholarship to Jerry Levias, who was only like the third Black player in that conference, in that part of the country, to receive a scholarship. And it was a pretty tumultuous time, and there were death threats, and it was really a struggle for them. And what I didn't realize was, when I went to Coach Fry's funeral, and Jimmy Morrow, who, stand up for a second. So Jimmy Morrow was a teammate of mine at the University of Iowa. We were wide receivers together. And he can attest to this. When we were at that funeral, and Coach Ferentz was talking about the legacy of Coach Fry and how many people's lives that he touched, and he had everyone stand up whose life that Hayden Fry had touched, and it was overwhelming, the generations and how many men stood up, and it was just very emotional. And when they showed the home movies of Coach Fry's life and his family, and Jerry Levias was in all those pictures. He was babysitting the kids, and they were out in the yard running around, and he was truly part of their family. And what was amazing is, in all the years that I knew Coach Fry, he never really talked about that. It wasn't about him saying, hey, listen, I gave a Black kid a scholarship. It wasn't any of that. It was the right thing to do. And, I talked to Robert Smith, who was in the documentary, and the biggest reason why he came to the University of Iowa was because of Hayden Fry. And his mother said to him, because Robert had the opportunity to go to like Oklahoma or Alabama or one of these other powerhouse schools, and Robert's mother said to him, do you want to play for the university or do you want to play for the man? And Robert decided to come to the University of Iowa, and upon his graduation, he went and asked Coach Fry why he did what he did, and Coach Fry said, because evil can't live in the light, and it was time to come out of the dark. So I think that's a very important story to be told, and then there are so many others. So to answer your question, yeah, I'm working on that, and hopefully it'll come to the TV soon, and you'll be able to watch these other stories. You had a question for me, right? It's over. It's over. Okay. Anyone else have a question? Yes, in the back. So the question is, how long did it take to make the documentary? It took me probably about a year. I originally wrote a screenplay based on his life, and I just felt like the story needed to be told, and people needed to be educated about who this young man was. And so, how long is it going to take me to raise millions of dollars to make a film, right? So I pretty much just took my own money and made this documentary, and it's just been a phenomenal experience, and so many people helped me along the way, and I definitely didn't do it by myself. And the University of Iowa, the football program, it's just such a family. They were so accommodating and helped me along the way. And like I said, Mike and all the historians that you saw on the film, everybody was just so excited to help me work on this project, and so it kind of made itself. So it was a great experience. Yes, sir.
Yes, I grew up in Point. I remember that in high school, hearing the story about a football player, I guess the first black football player at Iowa State, that supposedly, the story I heard was that the first game, his team, they refused to block for him, and he just got beat up and days later died.
That's Jack Trice, and I believe the story, they played the University of Minnesota. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's how he passed away. It was, back then, the game of football, without race being a factor, it was just a brutal game, and people died, not for being black, but just because it was a brutal game. And I heard back then, the play didn't stop when the whistle was blown. It stopped when you stopped moving. So now when you imagine, somebody who's black out there and they didn't want you out there, so they put a little extra sauce on that. So that's what happened to him. And, his story is a lot more well known, kind of like Slater, his story is known. But Jack Trice, and Iowa State named their stadium after him. So there are a lot of stories out there, like I said, that are known, but also there are the stories that definitely haven't been told, that need to be told. And my goal is to help try to accomplish some of that. He played, I believe, in 1923, so he was a couple of decades afterwards. Yeah. Holbrook was the first in the state. He was the first one, and I think the third overall in the country to ever play.
Good work.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yes, sir, in the back. So could you repeat I heard the second part of the question, John, but can you repeat the first? Oh, yes. For him. So he left the University of Iowa. I believe so he was a two-sport athlete. He played football and ran track, and he played football in 1895 and 1896. And then he ran track in 1896 and 1897. So he was there for 3 years, and we're not really sure why he left, but he actually came back to Tipton, and he coached the football team here, which is pretty incredible. And he coached a couple of other sports. I know he dabbled in boxing, he did some different things, and he was a blacksmith here. His father, James, passed away in 1910, and after that, he and his mother, Pinky, they moved to Los Angeles, California, and unfortunately, he passed away at a young age. He was 39, so what that tells me is, because I think his father passed away of the same kind of thing, right? Heart. So they probably had some heart disease or something like that. So he passed away fairly young. He was married for a time. That didn't really work out. He never had any children. So that's why I guess I was picked to tell his story and accept. Actually, I had an opportunity to accept his Hall of Fame award. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and they had the ceremony this past Friday, and I got to speak on his behalf, which I was extremely humbled and honored to do. And then at the halftime of the game on Saturday, they flashed his picture up on the Jumbotron and announced his name, and so it's just been an amazing experience. But I hope I answered your question, John. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone? Yes.
Why did it take so long for him to get inducted?
Because nobody knew about the guy.
Was it the documentary working on it?
Well, I don't want to say it was because of me or anything like that, but I think there were a lot of people. There were quite a few people who have written articles, and quite a few people who have had knowledge of him and have talked about him. But I think because maybe I'm well known in the program, and I asked some of the people in the program and friends of mine and some people in the media. So I think my voice kind of carried a little bit further maybe than others. So because of that, and hopefully, and I think because my documentary has made a dent, a lot more people found out about him. And again, so Lon Olenzak, who's part of the Hall of Fame, he's a former teammate of mine, and others I've talked to. So I think they brought up the fact that, hey, 126 years is long enough. This guy needs to be recognized. And I couldn't agree more, and I'm just excited and happy that he's getting his due finally.
Was there any other players from the conference champions team that has been inducted?
No.
Well, it just seems obvious that if you win a conference champion, you gotta have somebody.
I will tell you something about that, the Iowa Hawkeye Athletic Hall of Fame, is that it's not just football, it's every sport, and it's not just the athletes, but it's also coaches and administrators. And do you know that as of this weekend, there's only 214 people in that Hall of Fame. So and there's been tens of thousands of athletes to come through the University of Iowa. So it's a pretty rigorous process. So it's pretty amazing that he got in. But there are probably a lot of people who deserve to be in there that aren't. So that's.
Are you in there yet?
No, sir. I'm not looking for all that. I just, I'm just glad I can tell the story. Yes.
Yeah, one thing, Quinn, if you could address it, back then, they didn't have like All-American status or way to recognize people on the team. So when you look at how do you get somebody into the Hall of Fame, you look at whether they were all conference.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, Ernie, why don't you stand up too? Get out of that chair. So Ernie Sheeler played for the Hawkeyes as well. Thank you guys for being here. It really does mean a lot to me. But a good point that Ernie just made was back then they didn't really have All-American, or I don't think that came in until like the 20s, the 1920s in there, something like that. But they didn't have those accolades for the athletes. So it was probably pretty hard to keep track of what. But I do know that Frank Kenny Holbrook, I know that in 1896 he had like 14 touchdowns and he was smashing everybody. So, it was hard to stop him once they put him at halfback. And again, they won the conference titles primarily because of him. I mean, he was pretty.
I played like 6-7 games.
Exactly. So he was getting it done. That's for sure. So, yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. He's bringing you a microphone. I'm having a hard time.
I believe when we were at the Hall of Fame the other night, when Frank was inducted, I'm going to have a brain the administrator / baseball player, Fred Mims, who was in Iowa with me,
Yes.
was also inducted, and I believe he's the first black non-athlete in our Hall of Fame.
Oh wow, that's.
And I don't think anybody thought about that,
I
but
didn't know that.
did, because we went to school together at Iowa.
Yeah.
And you did a great job as he was an all Big Ten baseball player,
Sure,
playing in the
sure.
minors, and then also went on to be a tremendous administrator, worked with thousands really of student athletes, including my own son who played there a few years back.
Right.
And was a really strong advocate for the African American athletes, but also for all student athletes and helping them get a good education as well as be a good athlete.
Absolutely.
The other comment I wanted to make was that if you study sports media history, which I have some background, but it was not until the comment about when the All-American teams, there was not a lot of coordination or national coverage of any sports back then, maybe with the exception of baseball. And most of it was done by telegraph, quite frankly. And that got to the newspapers. But the college programs were so new and so fragmented. You talked about the team in '95, not even a coach. There was a lot of that. It was almost like club football, some of the club sports now. And when the advent of the radio came along, it changed everything.
Right.
Because then you could start to get the story out into the country. I mean, with radio stations, and then the Associated Press, the AP, all those types of things started to come together. And one of the really magnifying players that helped do that was Red Grange of Illinois in the mid-20s, because he was so electrifying, and he was a white player, but the reality is he was a tremendous athlete, and it really brought a lot of recognition to the college game. And of course, then he went out with George Halas to really form a big backbone of forming the National Football League to make it what it was. And from that point, it really accelerated. And obviously, there's still race relations issues, but it's really changed a lot of things.
Well, that's a great education. Thank you for that. Just to touch back on what you said about Fred Mims, even though he got in as an administrator, I do think that it was his body of work. And as you said, he was a phenomenal baseball player as well. So I think it was all of that, his cumulative body of work that got him into the Hall of Fame. Just like, when we do go back and talk about Frank Kenny Holbrook, he was a phenomenal track athlete. But he got in as a football player. But also, too, I think, not just the fact that he was the first, but he was a great football player and he was a great track athlete, too. So, I think sometimes it's the body of work that helps people to get into the Hall of Fame here at Iowa. I wanted to take a minute, too. Is she in there? I think that's great. I think she's deserving of it. She's a phenomenal coach. I wanted to take a moment too, just to go back on one of the questions I got earlier. Is how I got involved with this project. I wanted to acknowledge Joe Heath. Joe, stand up for a second for me. I know you're not expecting this, but so Joe Heath is a movie producer. And I actually found out that they were making a movie about Niall Kinnick, which I think, and deservedly so. And Joe was part of that process, and we had a phone conversation, and talked about the possibility of maybe me somehow being involved as a football liaison or a stunt coordinator kind of thing, whatever. But when we got off the phone, I started clicking around on the internet. And I saw this picture, and I was like, and I clicked on it, and it was the 1895 Iowa Hawkeyes, and there was Frank Kenny Holbrook in the corner, and I was like, what the? It was almost like I was meant to find that picture. And that's how it got started, and that's how the ball started rolling. But I just wanted to, I don't even think Joe knows that story, but I just wanted to acknowledge him for that. Any other questions? Yes, you have a question about this. (2010). Oh, hey. What's interesting is that it seems like it stayed in Cedar County. It needs to be out there, and some more light needs to be shined on it. Again, Mike, stand up. Mike helped me out a lot, and as you saw, he was one of the stars on that show right there we just watched. So, yes.
I know this is an off-the-wall question. Do you ever see a time when there aren't any white athletes or black athletes, just athletes?
That's the way it should be.
There should be. But do you ever see a time when
I hope so, but yeah, that's definitely the way it should be, right? I agree.
What's the status of Niall Kinnick?
You'd have to ask that man back there. He's the expert on that one. Yes?
Which cemetery is Frank Holbrook?
I think isn't there a Masonic cemetery in town?
Yeah.
It's right there. It's kind of on the left side. It's right off the road right there. it's like a little headstone. It just says Holbrook on it, and it says James Kinney Holbrook, and you might have to look for a little bit. Pamela Nosek, who was one of the historians, she knew right where it was, so she took me right to it. But it's over there. It's there. Who said yes? Stand up and tell us who it was. Other black athletes. But I do know there were other black families. What a lot of people don't know is, I believe, right, and Mike, you can tell me if this is true or not, but it was primarily a Quaker, right? Quaker population. And Quakers believed that all men were truly created equal and there was no color, right? Just to go along with your comment. And even that Captain Dillon, who his father valeted for in the Civil War, he fought in that war because he believed that slavery wasn't right. This isn't right. And he went and fought for it. So that's what was going on in Tipton. So that's why the Holbrooks were so revered and accepted in the community. And that's why, when it was time for Kinney to go off to the University of Iowa, they couldn't afford it. And the townspeople rallied around him and helped raise money so he could go.
That being said, have you seen our freedom park here in town?
I have.
That we were a stop on the Underground Railroad.
I know. Actually, Mike took me over there and let me know that part too. So he drove me over and showed me where the Holbrooks' home was. And then we went over around the corner. He said, and right there, that used to be an Underground Railroad right there. So there's just a lot of history here in this town. And it's just a pretty amazing thing.
Just to add to that as well, to your question, Kinney Holbrook was our first black graduate. During that time frame, Tipton actually had a really thriving black community. Maybe you want to speak on this real quick.
Yes, there were from 50 to 100 families in that period of time, and a lot of the black population came here. It was, as Quinn says, a welcome community. And the Quaker religion, the Quaker families, the Congregationalists, the Methodists. We had a lot of staunch abolitionists and a lot of Civil War veterans, and these families, they could start a new life here, and they were they had their own businesses here in town, and worked right alongside other members in the community. The black population was a very vibrant part of our community, and it was well embraced.
I also wanted to, I know I keep announcing people, but Caesar Smith, stand up back there. Get up out of that chair. I know your knees hurt. Look at you. I see you're back there. So Caesar was besides playing football, I also ran track at the University of Iowa. And he was one of my teammates, one of my brothers and teammates. So thank you to my brothers who are, all these many years later, have come to watch this film and be a part of this experience. It really does mean a lot to me. Thanks, you guys. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any other plans for your next project? Are there any other black athletes that you're looking into?
Yeah. So I don't know if has anybody heard of George Jewett? George Jewett was the very first black athlete to play football. He played at the University of Michigan, but not only did he play at the University of Michigan, but he played after he left Michigan, and then he went and played at the University of Northwestern. And they just created a traveling trophy that when Michigan and Northwestern play, this will be the first year I think. Do they play this year? Anyway, when they play, whoever wins that game will take that trophy, the George Jewett trophy, back home with them. So I think that's a pretty amazing story. Yeah. Like I said, there's a bunch of them.
How about Cal Jones?
Cal Jones, listen, we could sit up here all night and I could tell you like all these, there's so many of them. There's so many of them. So I just look forward, I have my work cut out for me, but I look forward to working on some of these projects, for sure. What was my major? I'm actually, I don't know if you saw some of the crappy drawings that were in the film, but I was an art major when I was here, and I always joke that, back then there were no computers, so if I had to get a job doing art, no one's gonna hire me, because now that everything's on the computer, right? But yeah, I haven't drawn in years, but because there was limited content, I had to blow off my pencil box and sharpen some of those pencils, and I did a couple of the drawings for them. Yes, sir. Okay, that's a good question. So again, I had mentioned earlier that I wrote a screenplay based on Frank Kenny Holbrook's life. I did that first. So I would absolutely love the opportunity to make a movie, and I had talked to a few people, including Mike, about pursuing making a film, and I would like to do, if that came to fruition, I would like to film most of that here in the state of Iowa. Maybe create some jobs, do that for the community. So hopefully that comes true. I have a few other projects, and I'm just throwing as much spaghetti at the wall as I can. I'm hoping some of it sticks. And but yeah, no, that's a good question. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much. Oh, you have a question? Yes, sir, young man. Who's my favorite football player? Currently or past or ever? Ever, my favorite football player. That's a really hard question. I do have a story though. So I was a huge, football fan, like a lot of us, right, growing up. And when I was in high school, I had a lot of heroes. I was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I was a Dallas Cowboy. Anyway, I just loved the game of football. So in 1988, I got drafted by the San Diego Chargers, and my very first preseason football game, we were playing the Dallas Cowboys. And a lot of you younger people won't know some of these names that I mentioned, but a lot of you older people will. We're warming up before the game, and Tom Landry runs by, and I'm like, that's Tom Landry. And then Tony Dorsett runs by, and I'm like, there's Tony Dorsett. I'm in my football uniform, we're warming up, and I'm starstruck by all these guys running by. And the same thing happened. The next week, we played the 49ers, and there's Joe Montana. And then there's Jerry Rice. And then there's Ronnie Lott. Oh, and then back to when we were playing Dallas, and Everson Walls, who was their all-pro star cornerback. The game started, we break the huddle, I go to the line, he's covering me, he's right up in my face, and he's telling me what he's in. I can't say some of the stuff he was saying because there's the kids here, but he's calling me all kinds of names, and I was smiling from ear to ear. I was so excited that Everson Walls just called me, called me these names and stuff like that. So, but it was just, but then just to cap that story off, towards the end of my career, I had some younger players telling me after the game, I used to act like I used to pretend I was Quinn Early when I was little. And now I'm just like, thanks a lot. You know what I mean? So it all comes around, But it was a great experience. So, anybody else, any other questions? So thank you, everyone. Oh, you have a question back there? No? Okay. All right, thank you so much for coming to this. Thank you for supporting the project. And thank you for supporting the F.K. Holbrook Society. And hopefully, I'll come back at some point and we'll see a statue of Frank Kenny Holbrook standing. Thank you so much.